Hello, everyone. Thank you for being in the room during this sunny day. We really appreciate that you make the effort to attend the BrIAS seminar. Today, we're going to have a presentation about unpacking the framing of information and democracy in EU institutional discourses on disinformation and mitigation, or disinformation mitigation, sorry. So we are very happy to welcome Sabri Derinöz, who is a researcher in media and communication at Saint-Louis, or UC Louvain Saint-Louis in Brussels, in a research unit which is called Engage. And Sabri's research focuses on the construction of public problems through discourse. He's also a researcher within a broader project, the EDMO Belux Consortium. He's going to maybe give a few words about that. And this consortium aims to monitor and mitigate disinformation through a multidisciplinary approach in Belgium and in Luxembourg, if I'm not mistaken. So he also holds expertise in diversity and inclusive policies in media organization, so don't hesitate to ask him questions about that. And beyond academia, Sabri Derinöz has been involved in the Conseil supérieur de l'audiovisuel, so it's the audiovisual regulator in French-speaking Belgium, and also within a journalist union in Belgium, in French-speaking Belgium. So it's really nice to have this combination between a researcher, an academic scientific researcher, but also someone who has been on the field and has been working within a media institution. So for all these reasons, we're very happy to have him in the BrIAS program today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. And thank you for this introduction. My name is Sabri Derinöz, and as you said, I was in and out of the university as a researcher, and I worked on public policies in the media sector mostly. I also worked a bit for a minister of media on media literacy and the question of equality and diversity. And equality and diversity was my first main topic for the last 15 years. And since last year, so I was working for that Minister of Media, and then there were the elections, and we lost the election. So I was back in the university in a different project. And the main project that put me back in the university was a disinformation mitigation project, which is called EDMO. I will present it in a few minutes. My perspective is mostly about media studies, discourse analysis, etc. And I really worked a lot on the rise of the public problem of diversity in media. And then I like to have this lens, this framework for other public problems, such as disinformation and disinformation mitigation. So today I want to present some research we started to do with Geoffroy Patriarche, which is professor in Engage, and which is also a member of EDMO Belux. And this is a research about disinformation mitigation, public policies in the EU, but mostly about information and democracy in disinformation mitigation public policies. So it's an ongoing research. So I have several results that I want to bring to the discussion today. But maybe it's not finished yet. So maybe some things are not perfectly done yet. So for the context of disinformation mitigation in the EU, there is since a few years a lot of initiatives to tackle disinformation at the EU level, mostly presented as a threat to our democracies. So we should protect the democracies from disinformation. And it came with different situations, with Russia's illegal annexion of Crimea in 2014, the election of Trump in 2016, the Brexit referendum, the famous Cambridge Analytica scandal, and of course the disinformation that was going on during the COVID-19 pandemic. EU's response to disinformation was in several steps and in several ways, but they really started really early about disinformation with a task force that was mostly based on that situation with Russia. So that they wanted to create a strategic communication to counter disinformation from the outside. But after a few years, there were some groups, expert groups, and then discussions and public consultations about disinformation that led to other documents from the Commission to present the way they were going to tackle disinformation, mostly online disinformation. So it started in 2018 with the communication that's called European approach to tackle online disinformation, and then they created an action plan against disinformation, mostly in anticipation to the 2019 elections. So they wanted to protect this election from disinformation. So afterwards, there were different policies that were made, but also different communication on the defense of democracy from the Commission. And in this communication, there was also an emphasis on disinformation and disinformation mitigation. So what's interesting is the ways the EU tackled disinformation. So they used multiple ways of creating public policies relating to fight against disinformation and try to have an integrative response to disinformation with a defensive approach, like with strategical communication against the FIMI, so the foreign interference and manipulation of information, and then also other ways like collaboration between civil society actors to support journalism, fact-checking, and a functioning media ecosystem, and also to strengthen the critical capacities of citizens through media literacy. And there was also a regulatory approach. Well, first it was a self-regulatory approach, and then a co-regulatory approach, and now with DSA we are more in a regulatory approach, but it took time. So this is kind of the kind of initiatives that were done. And one of the initiatives was to create EDMO, the European Digital Media Observatory. So I'm part of this, and I will present it right now. Yeah, that's quite a long introduction, but it's important for what I will say afterwards. So what is EDMO? So it's a project with a central hub, and with the idea of having like local hubs on different parts of Europe. For example, I'm part of EDMO Belux, which is an hub that is targeting the francophone part of Belgium and Luxembourg, and there are different other hubs, and all these hubs try to tackle disinformation in a multidisciplinary perspective, at the same time with researchers, universities, but also journalists, fact-checkers, and other actors from civil society, such as media educators, etc., etc. So the idea is to work together to have a multidisciplinary approach on tackling disinformation by doing research, by doing fact-checking, by communicating about and making sensibilization about these topics, and also by providing useful information to national authorities, but we are independent from any national or EU public authority. So this is EDMO, and EDMO Belux, the part I'm from, has different actors such as media, RTBF in Belgium, RTL in Luxembourg, AFP, DPA, and then media educators and universities, mostly VUB, and UC Louvain, Saint-Louis, Brussels. So what I'm doing in that hub, it's mostly the the WP2 work package 2, which is fostering the growth and the capacity of the Benelux multidisciplinarity community to tackle disinformation. So mostly about finding ways to communicate and in between all these approaches and try to spread information. So about disinformation, so there is a lot of current debates about post-truth and fake news and disinformation, especially in that context of democratic backsliding, the rise of populism, social transformations, and mostly the question of the evolution of the uses of technological tools. And in the scientific literature, there were different approaches to disinformation. So there is an emerging field of disinformation studies, and it's mostly a multidisciplinary approach, and there is a lot of different approaches about disinformation, from psychological approaches to more political approaches to disinformation and disinformation mitigation. So a lot of these studies try to understand the effects on disinformation and disinformation mitigation on individuals and on groups, and sometimes with different results. So we are not sure what are the effects or not. It's quite complicated. And some try to find solutions to reduce the potential risk of disinformation. But there are also critical perspectives that try to relativize, to think about the phenomenon in different ways. So is it all about disinformation, or maybe it's a part of a bigger problem or a symptom of a problem, etc. So there are a lot of discourses in this way. And then there are some studies that try to understand how the discourses are built on fake news and post-truth and disinformation. For example, a book from Farkas and Shu in 2023 was thinking about the way these discourses on post-truth, on disinformation and fake news have some ideas of what is the role of truth in democracy and what is a democracy. And at the end, they try to demonstrate that the model of democracy that is based on discourse on disinformation and post-truth are quite based on a liberal and consensual model, and that is a way of restricting other ways of building forms of democracy. So, second part of my state of the art about European Union's discourses and policies. So there is a lot that is said about these discourse and policies. The construction of the European discourses on disinformation also was part of the perspective that were analyzed. And for example, Alvaro Oleart and Garcia created some research on the actors who contributed to the discourse on disinformation, and showing, for example, that the big techs had a big role in this kind of discourse. So it's always interesting to see how European discourse are bricolage. And that there are the crossroad of different influences and in the continuity of previous discourses. So this bricolage creates at the end some normative and programmatic discourses based on what is done before, but also on the trends, the current trends, and that's quite a mix of different discourses into one. And what's interesting is to think about how they develop ideas of democracy and the public sphere. So in some discourse, we can see that they present an idealistic representation of Habermasian public space, and also a technocratic and legalistic conception of democratic functioning, reducing the importance of the role of democratic pluralism in the public sphere. So it's again done by Alvaro Oleart. What he also showed with Theuns was that there is a framing of democracy around three main frames, which are the rule of law, the quality of information, and media freedom. So this is really interesting literature, and what I wanted to know about that is how do we conceptualize information in these public policies. So this is central in what I will present today. So because you saw that there is already a lot that is said about how democracy is built, but I wanted to know more about information, because we never think about what is information in democracy. It's something that is never a topic for political actors, but also I think for researchers. So I wanted to start with this idea of having disinformation mitigation public policies, and I think that are built on a certain idea of what information is, because disinformation is related to information, and in particular its role in democracy. Why? Because I like the idea of the public problem being built by discourses. So this is the pragmatist perspectives on sociology of public problems. So the idea is that we create words to construct problems, and then we define the problem. So the way we define the problem will have influence on the way we define the solution. So if we define wrongly the problem, then there will be effect on the way the solution has effect or not. So the large research question that was done here was, how is the notion of information constructed, and how is it articulated with democracy in European discourses on disinformation mitigation? So a quick word about the methodology. So we use critical discourse studies. The idea of the critical discourse analysis is to show how these discourses are in relation of powers, and sometimes in relation of hegemony. So they have they participate in the creation of stable ways of seeing the world, or unstable ways of seeing the world with contestation of a dominant discourse, etc. So there are ways of naturalizing some discourses, so it doesn't look like it's something that we can change or that has to be told about. And then there are ways of contesting ideas, etc. So it's interesting to see how democracy is stabilized or is contested. The notion of democracy, I don't mean democracy as a political system, but more the way we think about democracy. So what we did is use several documents to analyze with critical discourse studies, and we focused on the word information and its articulation with what was producing the meaning of information, and especially in relation with democracy. So we took 5 documents, which are documents from the Commission. This is written in French because our corpus is in French, and it has effect, but I will explain it a bit later. But these documents are mostly the document I was talking about before. So there are these 2 documents on online disinformation, tackling online disinformation from the Commission, and the action plan against disinformation, and then 3 documents about the defense on democracy. So the European Democracy Action Plan in 2020, the Defense of Democracy Communication in 2023, and then last year's European Democracy Shields. So why this text? Because they talk a lot about tackling disinformation, and they talk a lot about democracy, and they are programmatic or normative documents. So the idea is to present the way the Commission sees things, and then they create public policies or public actions based on these perspectives. So we thought it was really interesting to see how they see information and democracy in that context. So the question of the corpus, the language selection. So we were thinking of maybe analyzing it in English. We used French because it's our mother tongue, and the European document are supposed to be equal in every language. We know that it's not really the case, but it was interesting to start in French, and then we had the idea of maybe compare it to English. So about the information, it's really important and quite interesting, because in the English versions of the document, sometimes when we talk about information in French. In English, we talk about news. So there is this difference that doesn't exist or not really exist in French. So in French, we use les informations to talk about the news. There are other words, but that we don't use a lot, like l'actualité, etc. So we were thinking about the effects on our analysis. What's interesting that we can see in the different excerpts here is the fact that sometimes they use, in the English version, news, but sometimes they use information, and sometimes it's not that clear of a difference between news and information. So it's quite interesting, and it can have influence in different ways, but in what we were trying to do, it's not that different, but still it's interesting for a few reasons. I will come back to that later. So finally, the results. So first I will talk about the results on the construction of the meaning of information. So there is no definition of information in these documents. And it's quite vague and polysemous. So the use of the word information is used as self-explained. So there is no reason to say by information we mean, etc. It's what they do, for example, with disinformation. Of course, there is a definition that they use for disinformation. And information can have multiple meaning and uses. It can be a really general use of information, like we will exchange information about that situation to prevent disinformation mitigation, for example. But there is also like this general idea of the information that is used by citizens to make choices, enlightened choices in democracy. So this is the main use of information that was appearing in the corpus. And also there are stabilized expressions that doesn't give meaning of information, such as information manipulation and foreign interference. So what's interesting about the definition of information, that there is not no definition, but there is a definition of disinformation. And on the first document, on page 1 and page 4, there is already like an ambiguity on what is information in regards to disinformation. So disinformation is presented as a part of information, but also information as a part of disinformation. So there is quite an ambiguity in the way information is built in regards to disinformation. But what's interesting is to focus on some elements that participated to the meaning of what is information without defining it. So, for example, the relation between information, the truth, and the relation to reality. So we try to see what was the conception or the multiple conceptions of this relation in our corpus. And what's interesting is that information doesn't have to be true to be an information. We can have like true information or false information, but also really a scale of truthness or falseness. Like there is information that are neither true nor false because they are misleading, maybe they are part of partisanship, etc. So the relation with truth is not like stabilized. And this is interesting because they say that there is a stake about the relation to information that is related to that. So the information can be true or false. So there is information we can trust. There is reliable information, verifiable information, etc. What's interesting too is the way of having better information is to improve the production of information. I will come back to that later, or the reception capacities. So the capacities to the citizens to be critical and to select the information based on these elements of trust and reliability, etc. What's interesting too is the value and the hierarchization of information. So and it's not directly related to that question of truth or not, but information can be more or less evaluated. So there is a quality of information, and the quality of information is often used in the corpus. So we talk about the quality of information, but it's not clear what's the quality of information. But we can see that there are these questions that appear. So there are good information and bad information. There is also a question of the integrity of information, for example, or other ways of evaluating and hierarchize the information. And what's define a good information, a quality information most of the time is who's producing it. So the media and the journalists are the main providers of the good information. What's interesting too is the way they think about information as an ecosystem. So they use a lot of words such as media environments, media landscape, media ecosystem too. And this is the kind of discourses they have with the idea of information being part of that system. And one of the main actors of this system is the media and journalists. So they are part of what creates information that makes people capable of having enlightened choices in democracy. It's something that's almost hegemonical in the corpus. So every time we focus on information, most of the time it's produced by media and journalists. So this is really central, and this is one kind of a way of thinking of people having information or something and making political choices afterwards. What is the meaning of media? It's quite traditional media. That's the main idea, even if they don't define it, but they also talk about news media with this idea of production that is professional with the respect of standards, etc. And what's really interesting is the way these different documents talk about the transformations around information. So they say first there was a system, and then the digital transformation is considered as a pivotal moment, and it impacts the production, the dissemination, the circulation, and the access to information. So they show that there are a few positive aspects in this digital transformation, such as maybe more plurality of access, sometimes actors such as platforms that can be useful, for example, during COVID for having like information that is considered as public information that were clearly provided to people and show that it was part of important information that should be shared. And but most of the time they start with a few positive aspects to show how this transformation impacted negatively this media ecosystem. So there are effects on media ecosystems because they, for example, they are gatekeeper for information. They also have all the advertising. So the traditional media are in position that they are losing ways of doing good information. And at the same time, there are effects on the citizens with the algorithms and the creation of a bubble filter, etc., that appear as a consequence of this digital transformation. So they identify a risk for the integrity and the quality of information, but again, with the idea of having an initial way of doing information that was working, functioning in democracy. So it's quite a conservative and idealistic way of seeing the relation between media, journalism, and information. So what they do to defend information is to defend media and journalism. Because it's important in democracy. So I will go a bit more quicker on the relation between information and democracy. what's interesting is the fact that they start with the idea of the fact that we are in democracy. So the European member states, they are all democracies. They are all, I won't say good democracies, but there are not really critical perspectives on the democracies in the member states. And there is a predominant model of what is a democracy. So, for example, this is how they present democracy. Sorry, this is in French, but the idea is that they have like the classical idea of a liberal democracy in Europe, and they use all the buzzwords related to liberal democracies in Europe, but it's more like a checklist, and they don't really open the debate on what is a democracy and what is a working democracy. And the second aspect is the relation between information and democracy. And there is this central figure of the informed citizen. So the citizen has to be informed to have the capacity to act in democracies, especially to vote and to participate in public debate. So this is really the way they present it, like a central figure of the informed citizen, but it's really like a kind of mechanical. So we put information inside the citizen, and then outside there is a good vote for the election. So it's not that simple, but it's kind of the way they present it. So the citizen has no real involvement or participation in the construction or the co-construction of the information. It's kind of a limited understanding maybe of the practices and use of information. So the citizen has the capacity to take the information and use it to enlighten himself, and then do the good decision at the end. And then in this situation, the information has different effects. So information can be a menace to the democracy because of the manipulation from foreign actors, but also because of the digital transformation that has effect on the production, circulation of information, including creating spaces for disinformation, and for hate speech, polarization, etc. Then there is the idea of that democracy must protect the information, mostly by protecting the information providers, so media and journalists. And what's interesting too is the idea of if we share information on this information and these menaces, it can help to defend democracy. So to finish quickly, here are some elements for discussion. So it's quite a conservative way of having an idea of democracy in Europe. So there is no words such as illiberalism, populism, for example, etc. So the idea of democracy is like it's evident that we are in democracy, and the way they present the democracy and the relation with information is clearly a representation of the liberal democracy, such as Habermas presented it, so representative and electoral. And there is a vague and restrictive reading of information. As we saw, it's information mostly produced by media in a media ecosystem that must be protected from transformation because it is seen as essential in democracy. And what's really interesting is that in that relation is the quite linear and techno-determinist understanding of that relation between information and democracy. So at the same time, the citizens are able, based on the information, to make enlightened choice, but at the same time, disinformation is a danger because people can be seen as a mass, vulnerable mass, such as we could see in some perspective in media studies and information and communication 50, 60 years ago. So this idea of people really vulnerable to the misinformation and disinformation that is provided by actors, mostly external actors from Europe. And in general, this relationship between democracy and information, there is no complexity on the dynamics of information production and usage in democracy. So it's quite really techno-deterministic, and it's quite limiting, of course. If we tried to tackle this information to protect information, it can have effect on the way we think about public policies. So just to finish, we wanted to use that notion of metapolitics. There is a lot of definition of metapolitics, but used by Jan Zienkowski, one of our colleagues from ULB. And in his words, the idea of the metapolitical struggle may be about not changing the content of politics, but the way of doing politics. So in our perspective that we have here in our corpus, it seems that there is a version of democracy and the role of democracy that is quite a conservative, stable way of thinking democracy that makes it a way of influencing what we think democracy is. So these public policies on disinformation mitigation can have effect on the rules and the ways of having a political system that is called democracy. So in this conservative way, it has a role because it kind of stabilizes a certain version of democracy that prevents other perspective on democracy and on the way people inform themselves in democracy. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Sabri, for a fascinating lecture. Thank you. We open the floor for questions from the audience. Who has a question? Who would like to go first?
Thanks a lot, Sabri, for this really excellent presentation. I'm glad that my work is somehow helpful. I had two questions. One, you analyzed documents that span from 2018 to 2025, sorry. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether you see an evolution over time. Like, are there some changes, or do you see a stable pattern from the beginning to the end? And the second is also a little bit related to this last part. Have you seen also the concept of media pluralism in the documents? Because I think this is media pluralism used to be kind of a concept that was used 10 or 15 years ago, but progressively has evolved towards kind of this media freedom or media literacy that has a little bit of a different spin, because the pluralism implies also kind of the focus on media concentration, for instance, that is notably absent from a lot of these discussions. So I was wondering whether you could also talk a little bit about that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. For the second question about media pluralism, so pluralism appear, but as you said, not about this question of media concentration, for example, which was, as you said, like one of the key elements to a working democracy and media ecosystem before. So I think in all the documents they talk about it like once they talk about media concentration, and mostly about this question of having information and transparency on media concentration. But we focus mostly on the word information and the context of information. So maybe there are other parts when they talk about it. So I don't want to talk about the whole documents and about the evolution between 2018 and 2025. So we tried to have a view on this. So we had at the same time a linear lecture of the corpus, and also trying to see the differences. At this moment, we don't have analysis on this, but I can tell you that there are a lot of things that are similar. Strongly similar, like they use the same word. Sometimes it feels like a copy paste, but as I said before, it's also part of the way they are handling these kind of documents. So, but at the same time, there are like depending on the context, we think that there are some trends that appear, and also depending of the other actions from the other actors in the other institutional actors. So, and maybe the influence of what EU is going to do in the next year, etc. So I can think about a few things about that, like a few words that are not there at first and that appear afterwards, and a few words that disappear. And there is notions such as information desert, for example, that appear, but only at the end. So it's quite new. The other words I should check, but maybe the question of integrity that is different between 2018 and 2025, and but it's something that we want to go deeper in.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed that it connects with the previous seminar we had with Alvaro, which is here. So it's really perfect. So I have first a question about whether disinformation and misinformation, like the institution, the documents you analyze, they make a distinction, or they really talk about one of these two phenomena. And if you see, I don't know, some variation or difference between these terms. And then it's really interesting the way, well, maybe it's not the word we should use, but I thought that the institution have quite a paternalistic vision of the citizens. Like like citizens are really seen as passive consumers, and it also relates to the idea of the European Union being kind of a, talking more about production and consumption than democracy per se, or practicing democracy. So I thought it was really interesting. So maybe would you use like paternalistic or elitist vision yourself? And also this very like rational choice vision of like citizens make well-informed decision. As an electoralist, we know people vote sometimes or often without being fully informed of the party programs and stuff. So it's a denial of also about like all the affects or emotions that can drive political decision or decisions by citizens. So like it's interesting how like the fact that these digital technologies, well, at the start or early on, we believed that it would empower citizens and it would give power to the citizens to create information themselves or share themselves information, and that would create a vivid democracy. And I think if we analyze autocratic regime or regime who are autocratizing, we put way more value on citizens using these technologies to share information, because we value more information coming from citizens than coming from official media. So it's not a question, but I think, yeah, I like your presentation because it also questions a lot our way of looking at information, citizen, and democracy. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I want to react to that because yeah, this is something that I think is really interesting, is the way we think about citizens as rational. They can make their own decision, but at the same time as this vulnerable mass that is influenced by disinformation. So these two aspects are really strong in the corpus. So this dichotomy is really central, and that's really interesting. And I like what you mentioned about the way we see citizens in autocracies, for example, are more like empowered and able to be critical and make critical choices. About the use of paternalism, I just come back in one of the discussions I had, because it's one of the words we used and I didn't use it today because I was a bit late, but of course there is an elitist, paternalist, and some would say neo-colonial critique of populism and post-truth, such as, say, the Maluli in an article in 2025. And this is really like in the center of the way they see democracy and the way we handle information democracy. So it's really, really interesting. And for the last part about disinformation and misinformation, so at first, yeah, when they use disinformation, most of the time they define it as the question of the intentionality. So they do the difference. At first, they don't use misinformation. Afterwards, there is a few occurrences of misinformation. Also, the time they are more interested in disinformation with the intentionality, especially from outside actors from the EU.
Another question. I have some questions in any case, so I have one very, very small question, that is why the key concept that you study is information and not disinformation. So why start from information when you do the discourse analysis? And the second one, it's actually also ties back to what Caroline was saying. Because when you presented this idea that, like the media and the journalists appear as the providers of good information in the discourses, on the one hand, I was surprised because, of course, we have examples from the US, for instance, where Fox News is also like one of the providers of other types of information. But at the second thought, I was also thinking, like, okay, but there is something also good about it, because that means that there's no direct attack on traditional media as one of the key pillars of democracy. But then what you're saying is also like, okay, but there's also the aspect of democratizing information. So I'm just wondering, like, how to evaluate these things, like from a democratic point of view, like normatively, like what do we do with these different elements? Like, can you put them together, or, well, it's not a question, it's more like an observation, but it's,
Yeah, but about the information or disinformation, there are a lot of studies about disinformation. What does that mean? What is the meaning in a lot of discourses? And I was a bit surprised when I started working on disinformation about the fact that we never talk about information, and disinformation is directly related to information. So for me, it was like really there was a void about that, and it was a bit frustrating for me because I was not sure of what is information mitigation in case we don't even know what is information and the role of information in democracy. So that's why it was the center. And I want to continue working on that question of information, but maybe having an understanding of what is to be informed for citizens. And I think I'm from media studies, information and communication, and I think something more close to what people do in political sciences, for example. But I like to think about how concretely people consider something as information. So not only news from media, but maybe the way they socialize with people, etc., and how they transform this information into political agentivity, and not only through votes, but having some ways of seeing the world and acting on the world on these dynamics. So it's something that I'm really interested in, and but I'm still on the way of thinking ways of researching on that. About that question of media, what is important for me, and it's related to what I just said, is the fact that we only think about one good way of having information it's through media. And when we say media, we think about traditional media. So there is a really conservative way, and there is no critical aspects on maybe what was not working on the older system on media and democracy. So this gatekeeping, this really vertical way of having information, this question of the way we distribute the role of epistemic authority, for example. So it's something that now it's moving because the world is moving, and they don't say that maybe we should think about better ways of having people well informed, but more about we should stay on that system that we think that was working. But I think the question of the epistemic authorities is really changing, and people trust different sources differently, etc. So maybe we should go forward and think about the future of democracy and how people are going to be informed on democracy and not try to have an old school way of thinking this. But this is something that I saw also in the politics and public policy in my other life. The question of pluralism, you talked about pluralism. So this question of plurality of opinion and voices, how do we create a situation with a lot of perspectives on the world that are shared to different people? And a lot of people just use like really conservative ways of thinking about that. So we should defend the press, for example. But in the French-speaking part of Belgium, for example, there is a lot of concentration, and the press has already a lot of state aids, and maybe, I don't know, but maybe this money can be used differently to strengthen other actors, audio media actors, or future media actors that are not considered as the traditional media or the media that provide for now quality information. But we should think of way for them to create quality information and to reach more audiences and a plurality of audiences too.
Other questions?
Yeah, picking up on what you just said, I was wondering while you were, giving your presentation, I wondered to what extent the documents actually talk about social media. Like, is this something that is being mentioned specifically? Because for me, it's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of misinformation or disinformation. And I was a bit surprised that it didn't seem to feature. So I wonder, is this something that, if those documents seem to perceive information or media more as a top-down kind of thing, does social media not feature at all? Because it is, I don't know, more created by the people, bottom up, something like that, or is that something you just didn't mention?
I try to mention it, but I had the idea of digital transformation. So social media are part of that digital transformation I was talking about, but they are not seen as providing quality information. So they are more like a danger for quality information. But that's interesting because in some case, for example, with the pandemic, they say that the platforms and the social media, they respected, they found ways to provide quality information, but that's just the only moment when they see them as a positive quality information provider. And they say that they have the potential for pluralism and access to information, but at the end they are never seen as information provider or either badly. Like they would say that young people trust more information on the internet, so it is something we should do something about. Or they say that they follow influencers, so maybe we should find ways of having influencer having a code of conduct or code of practice, but that's one of the only moments when they talk about these actors from social media, for example.
Thank you. Congratulations for your wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And what about propaganda? Because this is a kind of a disinformation and values, right? Because propaganda goes with manipulation. You talk later about this vulnerable mass of citizens, and most of the time about democracy. You know that this competition between the political parties sometimes also went through this disinformation voluntarily to have these voices. So it's not a question, just to have your thought about that.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, and that's something that's quite central in our way of thinking, especially from Geoffroy and me, about disinformation and this question, because the question of propaganda is quite old, especially in the information and communication studies. And with this question of disinformation, these words kind of never reappeared. But most of the time when we talk about disinformation, we talk about manipulation and disinformation and interference from actors. So it's kind of propaganda. But also when we present it, it's always something from the outside, and there is really, really few moments when you think about the way people are communicating or disinforming or creating propaganda from the inside of the EU. But this is something central, because some people would say, okay, we talk about disinformation mitigation, but is it not all about communication and propaganda? It's possible too, and then there is the question of the truth and the question of Hannah Arendt, etc. But I won't go into that.
Thank you. Other questions? I don't think so. Okay, then I think we can finish. So thank you so much, Sabri, for a very interesting presentation, and also the audience for all the interesting questions and the discussion. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we just end, and I think we can stop the